In this lesson, we learn about Arnold Driver. To export still frames and animations when you use Arnold for Cinema 4D, you can use the native Cinema 4D's workflow. We'll be using this scene, and as you can see from the IPR, we have a bunch of books and this bottle and this textured clock added to our previous objects. Also, I have this rotating object in the scene just so we have some animated objects. Let's go to the render settings and select the output. Here you can obviously define the resolution, aspect ratio, the frame range. I'll just change the frame range so we are rendering from frame 50 to 55. And if you go to the save section, you can define where and how you want to save your render. I have this folder called deleted on my desktop, and let's type something like maybe geo details for the file name. And then you have your default Cinema 4D save option, format, depth. Down here you have multipass image output. So that's here where you can save your AOVs, or what we know it in Cinema 4D as passes or multipasses. So if I go to my Arnold Renderer tab and choose AOVs tab, I can add provided AOVs or render passes to my final render. We discuss AOVs in detail in the next lesson, but for the moment let's just select direct and indirect diffuse and direct and indirect specular and drag them to the from the inactive AOVs to the active AOVs list. So now we're gonna get those passes or AOVs with our beauty AOV. Now we just need to define where we want to save those AOVs or passes. So let's just copy the path for the beauty render and paste it here. So the AOVs will be saved out with the beauty pass. Let's uncheck multi-layer file for the moment so we get separate images for each path and not one file containing all the passes that we would have to extract it in a compositing app. Even though that's actually the better workflow, but for now I want to make sure that you actually see those individual AOVs. Also, let me change the format to something like PNG for the beauty pass and the AOVs. And that's it. Now I can simply render my scene. Just to make the process and rendering a bit faster, let's go to the output tab and change the width to something like 500. And in the Arnold render section, let's adjust the sampling to be able to quickly basically render the scene. So set the camera samples to something like 2 and all the other samples to 1. We're gonna have very noisy and small renders, but we don't care in this case. So we're ready. Let's hit the render to picture viewer button. As you can see in the picture viewer, we get 6 frames being rendered from 50 to 55. And if I go to the layer tab and change the mode to single pass, I can see different AOVs for each frame. Let me change the mode to image and go back to the history tab. And now if I open up the output folder, you can see we have our beauty pass and other AOVs saved out. Now let's delete all these files and put this folder aside and close the picture viewer for now. Now if you take a look at your object manager window, you can see when we rendered out our animation, Arnold added a new object named display driver. And if I select it and go to the driver tab, you can see this driver type is set to C4D display. So we are using Cinema 4D's native save options to output our render. And if I expand this driver to see its children, you can see we have access to the individual AOVs that we added a moment ago in our render settings. We can select them individually and control their options if we wanted to. Now what you see here named as display driver is actually an Arnold Driver object, which you can use it to save an output. Let's create a new Arnold Driver from Arnold plugins menu. You can define the format you want to save your output with. In this case, let's use TIFF for example. You can alter the filter type. You can add AOV specifically to this driver. So let's say I want to have my Z depth and normal AOVs in the TIFF format. So let's click on the setup AOVs and add Z for Z depth and N for normals and press OK. Now in the main tab, you can define where you want to save this output. Let's save it to the same folder we have defined in the Cinema 4D save options. Because we are rendering a sequence, we need to add padding. So let's add the padding. Let's see, maybe 3 padding would be enough for this render. So the first render file will be named 001, then 002, then 003. And now we can render out the scene. Remember, right now, because we are having 2 drivers in the scene, this driver that we just created, which is going to render a beauty pass and a Z depth and a normal pass in the TIFF format, and we still have our display driver, which is going to render the scene using the Cinema 4D save options, and it is going to have the AOVs we have set up in the render settings window. Okay, now let's click on the render to picture viewer and wait for the render. Now in the picture viewer, you can't see the passes from the new Arnold driver that we created, but if I go to the output folder, you can see we have the original beauty and AOV passes from Cinema 4D save options, and also we have the beauty, Z depth and normal AOVs in TIFF format from the Arnold driver that we created later on. There might be cases where you only want to render an output using Arnold driver and disregard the renders from C4D save options. In that case, you need to go to the render settings window and in the save section change the format to Arnold dummy. And this way only the Arnold driver will output your render based on the options you specified there. But you still need to have a file path defined here, otherwise Cinema 4D won't start the rendering process. So that's about exporting and Arnold driver, and I will see you in the next lesson to talk about AOVs. So see you there.